Hi, this is part 2 of the discussion on easy ways in which you can remember the preterite tense endings of verbs in Spanish. And what I did in part 1 was to take an AR verb as an example, and the one which I used was hablar. And what I did was to show you how you can jump from different persons in the present tense to either the same persons or different persons in the preterite tense to master the endings in the latter. And what I did was to begin by saying that the we form of regular AR verbs in both the present and preterite tenses are identical. And then what I did was to ask you what the first person present tense ending of an AR verb such as hablar is, in that case hablo. And then to jump from the first person present tense, the I form, for example I speak, to the third person preterite tense form, he, she, it, you formal one person spoke, using the same spelling but altering the stress. Hablo. So jumping from hablo, I speak, to hablo. He, she, it, you formal one person spoke. And then the recommendation was to jump from there to the first person preterite, I spoke, changing just the final vowel but still accentuating it, and instead of saying hablo, saying hable, H-A-B-L-E with an accent. And then I also made a passing reference to the fact that that same ending for I is also used in the future tense but with the full verb, in which case I will speak or I will talk is translated as hablaré. Then what I did was to jump back to the present tense and ask you to consider the Spanish translation of you speak, hablas, and then jump to the corresponding person in the preterite tense, you spoke, by using the same verb conjugation, hablas, but then extending it by adding the te ending, hablaste. And then what you can do is to lengthen once again to get the corresponding form for you guys, hablasteis. So that covers 5 out of the 6 possible conjugations, excluding the actual infinitive, of regular present preterite tense endings in the Spanish language, leaving just the one remaining, that being the they form. In this case, they spoke. And this one is perhaps best treated in isolation, and what you do to form it is you use the full verb infinitive hablar and add the letters on. So you still have the expected n ending to stand in for they in they spoke, hablaron. So now what I want to do is to include into this video the preterite tense endings for ER and IR verbs on the condition that those verbs are regular. And what you will find is that the endings for ER and IR verbs in the preterite tense are in fact identical to one another. So let us go back once again to I spoke, hablé. When you translate, for example, an ER verb such as comer into the preterite tense, you start with I ate or I ate, and that is comí. So instead of the accentuated e or English vowel e, you have the accentuated vowel e, the English vowel I. C-O-M-I with an accent, comí, I ate. Now what's important to remember when you're conjugating ER and IR verbs in the preterite tense is that the I, the vowel I, must be retained throughout all the persons in that particular tense. So no matter what the ending is, although as you'll see in due course the endings are pretty much identical in the preterite tense for AR verbs and also for ER and IR verbs, you do identify many similarities. As I say, what is important to remember is that the vowel I will recur from one person to the next. So, hablé, I spoke, but comí, I ate or I ate. The next person, you spoke, hablaste. The ending there being A-S-T-E, but also the ending S-T-E. And again, this ending of S-T-E is used in the corresponding U form for ER and IR verbs, but instead of it in A, as I've just said now, you have to include an I in the conjugation ending, so you will say comiste, but you ate. For the third person ending, which when we looked at hablar, we saw that he, she, it, you, formal one person spoke, translated as habló. And for the ER verb comer, you retain the ending o, the stressed vowel o, but as I said just now, you have to include the vowel I, so this time the ending yo, comió. Then moving on to the first person plural or the we form of the verb, you have to include the expected ending, mos, as is recurrent through all the different tenses in Spanish, replacing the A in hablamos with the vowel I, comimos. Then compare the you guys forms for you guys spoke and you guys ate. Hablasteis, but this time comisteis. So the only difference there being the switch from the vowel A in hablasteis to the vowel I in comisteis. And then just slightly different, while with the they form you have the ending ron or ron again, instead of the A you include the I, but then in addition to that you also have to include an E after the I, comieron. So that particular form not being as easy perhaps to remember as the other 5 verb conjugations from I down to the you guys form. And then as I say, the forms for IR verbs in the preterite tense are identical to ER verbs, provided that the verbs in question are regular. So let us take, for example, the verb to live, vivir. I lived, viví, with the I. Remember to retain the I in each of the conjugations. You lived, viviste. He, she, it, you, formal one person lived, vivió. We lived, vivimos. You guys lived, vivisteis. They lived, vivieron. So that's just one method to learn the preterite tense endings, and one which I call the jump method. Alternatively, what you could do is to list the endings in a verb table as is often presented to you in textbooks and grammar books which are used on GCSE and A-level language courses. But what you could do in speaking is to give the I form of an AR verb and then an ER and an IR verb in the preterite and just compare the different sounds and the different endings. For example, hablé, I spoke. Comí, I ate. Viví, I lived. Hablaste, comiste, viviste. Habló, comió, vivió. Hablamos, comimos, vivimos. Hablasteis, comisteis, vivisteis. Hablaron, comieron, vivieron. So what I'm doing here, I'm using a type of pacing method whereby I'm giving the endings for the regular AR verb and then in quick succession a different ending but the same ending for the ER and IR verbs. Now what I'll do is I'll release a part 3 to this series of videos on endings to the preterite tense, and what I'll do is to discuss the endings of irregular verbs in the preterite tense, which aren't always easy to remember, but it's a technique which I call the Zigzag Method, and as I say, it's just another alternative method to learning the endings of the preterite tense without having to consult verb tables.